Welcome to Tales from the Graves, where shadows lurk and whispers echo.
Join us as we delve into the unknown, exploring tales of mystery, horror, and the supernatural.
Be prepared to journey into the darkness, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Jess.
Together, we're the Graves Sisters, and we'll be your guides as we unearth the strange and unusual.
So find your flashlight, grab your shovel, and let's dig in.
The following podcast is rated for mature audiences.
It may contain graphic scenes of violence and explicit language that some may find disturbing.
Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Episode 3, Gravediggers. Today, we're digging into vampires, the origins, the myths, the legends, and how those developed into what we know as vampires today. I'll also tell you the true story of Mercy Brown and the legend of the Casket Girls of New Orleans. You ready for this?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Now, have you heard the story of Mercy Brown or the Casket Girls of New Orleans?
I've heard a little bit about Mercy Brown, but the Casket Girls?
Yeah.
That sounds really cool, actually. It sounds like a gang I want to be a part of.
Maybe. So, the first recorded mention of vampires is found in ancient Sumerian and Babylonian mythology, in which demons known as, I'm probably not saying this right, but Ikimu, would feed on the blood of the living. The Ikimu was a semi-spirit capable of transitioning between the ethereal and physical realms. They were believed to arise from various circumstances like an improper burial or violent death. They were also believed to be able to possess and control others. So maybe this is where the idea that vampires can hypnotize people comes from.
Okay.
So almost every culture has some form of blood-drinking creature, whether it's a demon, a spirit, or something in between, that, we could go on for hours with different lore from around the world. So instead of doing that, we'll be focusing on more of the Slavic legends today, as their lore seems to be linked a little bit closer to the vampires we see represented in media today. So the Slavic vampires, called upir, were non-corporeal. That means that they were, more akin to spirits or a poltergeist.
Oh.
So they would cause problems for their families, their friends, their neighbors, or sometimes they returned to do the chores that they once did in life.
Why would you come back just to do chores? It sounds like a very OCD thing to do.
Well, I think it was, kind of based on the whole, my family, this is what needs to happen at this time kind of thing. So, again, these are just legends. Now, there were a lot of ways people could become an upir. The easiest was being physically different. So, yeah. Stick with me here. So, you could have red hair, being left-handed, if you had a limp, a unibrow, a double set of teeth, or had a gray mark on your back, which I'm guessing was a birthmark.
I'd probably be one of them because I'm pretty sure I have a mustache. You wouldn't disagree.
No, I wouldn't disagree. So, anyway, there was also being a different religion than the one that dominated the area. So if you're like a Catholic and the region that you're in is Protestant, oh my gosh, you're probably going to become an upir when you die.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So we have war to thank for spreading the belief about vampires. In 1686, which is 6 years before the Salem witch trials, the German-speaking peoples of the Holy Roman Empire gained control of Hungary. And as a result, they took control of a Slavic population. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't all Slavic people, but it was a population of them. The imperial troops learned of the vampire legend from the Slavic peasants during the occupation. From there, those soldiers carried the idea to places like Siena and Berlin, then on to Paris, from Paris to London, and finally from London to the Americas. It seems that the further west the vampire legend traveled, the more features seemed to change. Instead of a ghost, the vampire became a risen corpse, solid and able to move about, and of course, the need to consume blood. Mm-hmm. So, basically, through word of mouth, vampires became these undead creatures who arise at night to feast on human blood due to various reasons. You know, they became vampires due to various reasons still. We see the same effect with the phone game.
I was actually about to say that, like a really bad game of telephone or grapevine.
Yeah. So you start with one story and it's told through a line of people. And by the time it reaches that end person, the story's changed. Things have been embellished, things have been added, things of that nature. So now we know how the legends spread, but what about the aspects of the legends? The blood drinking, the ways to protect yourself from them, and then how to dispose of vampires.
Oh.
The blood drinking actually added a scientific element to the vampire legend. In the 1700s, human blood was believed to possess medicinal qualities, and it was widely consumed as medicine throughout Europe and the Americas by people regardless of status.
Ugh.
Yeah, so kings all the way to peasants were drinking blood, man, for just, I guess, whatever ailed them. The tummy ache, have some blood. Because, I don't know, I guess just have some blood, you know? Today, drinking blood is referred to as medical cannibalism. But back in the 1700s, blood was cheap because so many people did bloodletting.
I was about to ask about that because I know that they were sucking blood out of people with like leeches and stuff like that. But
yeah, so bloodletting, like a doctor would come and he would have this tool that I would hope was cleaned in between patients, but probably not.
Probably not, yeah.
But it's basically just razors, like razor blades, and he would cut along the arm and collect the blood. And you were bleeding out your sickness. So why on earth, if they believed that you were getting rid of your tainted blood, would that be medicinal for somebody?
Because you'd be drinking quote-unquote sick blood.
Exactly, yeah. But it was plentiful because of bloodletting. They believed that the blood was the vessel of the human soul, and therefore life. You lose too much blood, you're gonna die. So, I mean, it makes sense, you know? And it made perfect sense for vampires to seek out human blood to sustain themselves with taking in human souls, as they were soulless creatures of the undead.
Especially if they were gingers.
Yeah, I guess so. Because apparently being redhead made you an appear. So,
I guess.
Now, protecting yourself from a vampire, strangely enough, follows pretty close to what we see in movies. Garlic is a prime example of this. It was specifically the smell of garlic that would deter the vampires from coming into your home. So you'd hang up garlands of garlic by your doors and your windows. They'd come along and they'd be like, ooh, no, it's too stinky. A branch of wild rose and hawthorn have also been associated with causing harm to vampires. I wasn't able to find a whole lot of that, but I was able to find where those types of branches may have been placed on possible vampire graves.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. So in Europe, mustard seeds could be sprinkled on the roof of a house to keep them away as well. I don't know, man.
If you could see my face right now, I'm like, I would just be taking a bottle of Frank's, or French's mustard, and just squirting my window.
I think it specifically had to be mustard seed, but I mean, maybe mustard could work in a pinch.
I mean, shoot, why not?
So, sacred religious items became popular to keep the blood-sucking creatures at bay, to help distinguish creatures from evil origins and saints. If you're unaware, for the Roman Catholic Church, the lack of decomposition could be seen as a sign that the deceased was a saint ordained by their god. There were also parts of folklore that tell us vampires were unable to walk on consecrated ground, such as church or temple grounds, and that they can't cross running water. So, crosses, holy water, rosaries, those types of things, it became popular to put up because, you know, if you're evil and you want to suck my blood or something, you know, God will protect me kind of thing. And that was popularized kind of by the Roman Catholic Church. They're like, oh, well, we have to defend the fact that saints also do not decompose at a normal rate. So, they can be around holy relics. Yeah. Now we get to mirrors. The concept of vampires being unable to see their reflection, super old. I think that's, you know, a well-known quote-unquote trick.
Mm-hmm.
So, with the mirrors, that depends on what lore you find. Mirrors have been placed facing outward on a door to ward off vampires. Some cultures believe that seeing their hideous face, or I guess maybe the soul and soullessness inside them, would scare them away from it. And other cultures state that the vampires have no reflection. Just no reflection. I wasn't able to dig up a whole lot of lore behind that particular aspect. So again, we go back to, you know, the phone game where, they can't see themselves in mirrors.
Well, another thing about the phone game is I remember hearing something about old mirrors. Nowadays, it's made with it's a piece of glass and it's coated with some kind of material. But back then they had to use stuff like silver dust or something.
Yeah. So, getting to that, the mirror thing was made very popular by Bram Stoker's Dracula. And mirrors, before the 1800s, they used a mercury metal-backed mirror. But in the 1800s, they were a liquid silver solution was on the back. And silver was considered a pure metal. And because it's a pure metal, something evil or ungodly, like a vampire, would not be able to be seen reflected in the silver.
Ah, ha, ha.
Yep, there we go. Yep, you knew it. When we look at the methods of exterminating vampires, we have to look specifically at the different cultures that spawned our lore and why these people believed that a vampire was around, that he was doing mischievous things. So, most of our legends come from around Bulgaria and Hungary. These were people very rooted in their faith, and it was very much the Dark Ages for them. The sciences were not very well known. I think I've seen movies and newspaper clippings of places like Bulgaria and Transylvania, in even the 80s, and it still looks like the late 1800s. They're so remote. They don't get a lot of updates on things, kind of stuff. So these people didn't have a firm grasp of sciences. If someone passed away violently, or if they ended their own lives, that person was almost guaranteed to return as a vampire. If someone passed and suddenly members of the deceased family, friends, or neighbors began to grow ill or die, then they believed that the person who died first was a vampire.
So it's basically like a curse?
Yeah. Other ways that could confirm a deceased person was a vampire would be their appearance. Under the cover of night, they would exhume the body, and if they were bloated in appearance, purplish or dark in color complexion, with no signs to little signs of decomposition, then they were a vampire. These characteristics were often attributed to the corpse rising and drinking blood, which was often seen around the mouth and nose. A common practice after the body was exhumed was to take a wooden or metal stake and drive it through the vampire's heart or navel, through the coffin, and into the ground to keep the vampire in their grave. Now, depending on the region, they remove the head and place it at the supposed vampire's feet or just underneath their buttocks, or set a heavy stone on top of their head. In some cases, where a family member had become ill, they would remove the vampire's heart, burn it to ash on a stone, mix it with water, and have the afflicted person drink it.
Ugh.
Yeah, like some grotesque tonic. Today, we know that when a body begins to decompose, if it hasn't been embalmed, fluids inside the corpse will try to find a way to escape. And the mouth, the nose, the ears, the eyes, those are all excellent exit points. But that is today's science. When the lore of the vampires began, there wasn't really any study of how different environments affect the decomposition rate and how bodies decay over time. As time progressed and people moved from east to west, the vampire legend took on newer features we know today. The first major work of vampire fiction was John Polidori's 1819 novella, The Vampire, which introduced the idea of the aristocratic vampire who seduces his victims.
Ooh, sign me up.
The most well-known vampire novel was first published in 1897, Dracula. The charismatic count that traveled to London from Transylvania and to more plentiful hunting grounds. Stories in books are one thing, but people believed in vampires so much that in 1892, in Exeter, Rhode Island, we have our account of Mercy Brown. Roughly a decade before, several members of George and Mary Brown's family suffered from consumption, now known as tuberculosis. Mary, the wife and mother, was the first to succumb to the illness. Their eldest daughter, Mary Olive, followed in 1884. Then, years later, in 1891, that's when Mercy and her brother Edwin contracted the disease. Mercy passed in January of 1892. Friends and neighbors believed that one of the dead family members was a vampire, although that's not what they called it at the time. They believed that they caused Edwin to get sick. They were basing this off the folklore that multiple deaths in one family pointed to undead activity.
They just didn't think that it was contagious and that maybe they could pass away from that disease that person passed away from?
Girl, this is 1892. Mercy's father, George Brown, was persuaded to allow the villagers and the local doctor to exhume his family from their graves on March 17th, 1892. Both his wife, Mary, and eldest daughter, Mary Olive, showed the expected signs of decomposition. Mercy's body, however, showed hardly any signs that decomposition had begun. Blood was still found in her heart as well. They believed that Mercy was the undead and the cause of her brother's condition. As the folklore told them, Mercy's heart and liver were removed and burned, the ashes mixed with water, and that was given to Edwin to drink to hopefully break the influence of the undead. Spoiler alert, Edwin died 2 months later. Yeah. In reality, Mercy's body was kept in freezer-like conditions in an above-ground crypt for 2 months following her death due to winter and how hard the ground was. Keep in mind, this is in Rhode Island. So that's pretty far north, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she was essentially frozen and then placed in the cool ground when it had thawed enough to dig into. Mercy Brown's story isn't a one-off. In Eastern Europe, they have discovered hundreds of suspected vampire burials where bodies have been buried with a stake through them, their legs pinned, rocks placed on their heads or inside their mouth, and farm equipment such as scythes and pitchforks were positioned in such a way that should the corpse decide to rise, they would hurt themselves or impale themselves and were essentially trapped within their grave.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Urban legends formed in the Americas. We're going to be covering urban legends at later episodes. One such legend is about the Casket girls of New Orleans.
Ooh, I wanted to hear about them.
So in the early 1700s, about 1728, the Filles à la Casket, or girls with the suitcases, started being sent to New Orleans from France. So at the time, New Orleans was just an outpost, and it was within the Louisiana Territory that the French occupied. The governor of the region requested that the King of France send them over pure brides to try and basically calm down the rowdiness of the current settlers, because they were pretty much all men, trappers, fishers, like they were rough and tumble kind of
Grizzly Adams type of folks.
Yes. Well, the King of France did so. He petitioned convents and orphanages to find young women, and this is where it's kind of gross, but we have to remember it's the 1700s, between the ages of 12 and 23. Basically of childbearing age. You know, they could bear a child. These women were marriageable and had been sent to the French colonies to do just that. Get married and really start a society in the New World. A year before, in 1727, the Ursuline nuns arrived in New Orleans with a mission to educate the women of the colony and, of course, evangelize to the natives. Spread their gospel kind of deal. The young women would stay with the nuns until they were married off to the men of the colony. The suitcases these girls carried resembled small trunks. Eventually, Casket morphed into Casket over time, which translates to casket. History recorded these women as casket girls. The caskets these young women were known for was a suitcase filled with their belongings. They moved their whole lives with a small amount and became some of the original mothers of New Orleans. The word casket conjures a much different image than trunks filled with dresses.
Mm-hmm.
They were small enough for the women to carry on their own. However, many depictions and sketches of these women show trunks big enough to carry a body inside. As more people read about these women and their caskets, the more stories seemed to spread. Why did they need caskets in the New World? And did their luggage contain more than just petticoats? The casket girls in question arrived in New Orleans, and their intendeds, upon seeing the women for the first time, found them unnaturally pale, so much so that their skin seemed to blister and burn within moments of being in the sun. Some say the caskets that these women had were much larger than the ones that previous women carried, and much heavier. These women went to live with the Ursuline nuns before their marriages occurred and advised that their caskets be stored and not opened until they left. So the nuns took the caskets to the third-floor attic of the convent and sealed them away. When the women left, the nuns went to open the first of the caskets, but found it already open and empty. They checked the other caskets and found that they too were empty. In a panic, the nuns came to the conclusion that the girls had brought vampires to the colony with them and that they left their caskets and out the window to feed upon the innocents of New Orleans at night. The Ursuline nuns sought a blessing to prevent unholy creatures from returning to their caskets to sleep for the day. They closed the windows and nailed them shut with nails blessed by the Pope. Some say the girls themselves were the vampires, and their caskets were filled with dirt to keep them safe from the sunlight as they slept. Others say that the vampires traveled in these caskets to the New World, and these women were simply enthralled to do their bidding. You know, like Renfield and Dracula.
Oh.
Yeah. Regardless of which legend you hear, it is true that the third-floor attic of the Ursuline convent is sealed, but the convent wasn't built until 1734, and that building was later replaced with the existing convent in 1751. Supposedly, the nuns held a procession from their original makeshift convent and school to their new one in 1734. Something to distract the onlookers from the large and long boxes they moved from one location to the next.
Okay, that is not what I expected the Casket Girls to be.
What did you expect them to be?
I don't know. I guess like some kind of weird, not really weird, but some kind of like voodoo priestesses that made their own vampires or something. But that is completely different. So it was something just innocent. That, of course, with a bad telephone game, got turned into something completely different just from one word being changed.
Exactly.
It was fake news.
Oh my god. Well, that's the story of Mercy Brown and the Casket Girls and some of the lore behind vampires. So, Gravediggers, what are your thoughts on vampires? Did the Casket Girls of New Orleans really exist? Or is there just a fun story to tell on a tour of a city with rich and spooky history? and one of the myths and legends from Eastern Europe, so believed in that the people of the regions took precautions to keep the vampires in their graves. That's up to you to decide. Because for now, I'm going to lay this one to rest.
If you like what you heard, please feel free to follow, like, rate, and review Tales from the Graves podcast on your preferred listening platform.
We also would like to know what you think and what topic you suggest we unearth next. Email us at talesfromthegravespod@gmail.com or reach out to us at Tales from the Graves podcast on Instagram.
And if you have Discord, join us in the graveyard. The link is in our bio on our Instagram as well as this listening platform. Thanks again, Grave Diggers. Keep on digging.